Margaret, thank you for the introduction. In case you haven't heard, she's leaving. She did such a fine job here at the Bush Center that the University of North Carolina has hired her. We're sad to lose her. Happy she's been here, and wish her all the very best. I, too, want to thank the Morning News. Where's Jim? Yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks very much for this collaborative effort. I hope that, I know it's in our interest to work with you, and I hope you at the Morning News, the august Morning News, realize it's in your interest, particularly on a policy that'll help our city and our country. I want to thank those from Mexico and Canada who've joined us. I appreciate you taking time. I hope you recognize that our efforts here are going to have a lasting impact. I also want to thank people that used to be in my administration and those working with Rooney on making sure this project is worthwhile. In our midst, we've got Tony Garza and David Wilkins. I think Wilkins is here. Wilkins, it's you. Anyway, yeah, it's good to see you. I couldn't miss that shining bald head. Anyway, they were our ambassadors to Mexico and Canada and did a fabulous job representing our country, and we're thrilled that you're here to lend your expertise. I noticed members of the Bush Center Board of Directors, Mark Langdale, who was also an ambassador to Costa Rica, and Karen Prothrow, who are with us as well. So here's the challenge at the Bush Center, is how do you make a lasting impact on our society and the world? So in thinking about how Laura and I are going to spend the rest of our life, we're trying to figure out how to use this facility to be able to say that we've done our duty with others to improve the lives of a lot of people. For example, we have started a cervical cancer campaign on the continent of Africa, trying to help women deal with the leading cause of death for women. We believe that we can help train future leaders in leadership programs, so we're working with Clinton's library, that would be Bill Clinton's library, 41's library, that would be George H.W. Bush's library, and LBJ's library, to use case studies from our respective times as president to help young people understand how to become a better leader. These aren't political leaders. These are leaders that would help in their respective communities, no matter what their calling may be. We believe that it's important to help women understand their rightful place in the Middle East. And so therefore we got mentoring programs to teach leadership skills to Egyptian women and Tunisian women, as well as younger folks from Burma, all aiming to lay the foundation for peace. We believe in education reform, and today we're talking about how to advance our economic interests in the United States, as well as our neighborhood. And so we've got what we call the North American Project, and as Margaret mentioned, the cornerstone, the philosophy of this effort is promoting free market economics as the best way to lift people out of poverty and give people a better shot at a better life. Part of the issue we face in working with Canada and Mexico is a protectionist sentiment that tends to pervade our society. By the way, it also runs hand in hand with an isolationist sentiment. I mean, the attitude basically is, shouldn't we worry about ourselves more than anybody else? Problems seem insurmountable elsewhere. Therefore, let's just kind of shut her down and make sure we do well. The problem with that attitude is that it doesn't really recognize the nature of the world today, which is a globalized world. You know, we compete here in the United States, as does Canada and Mexico, with countries elsewhere. Goods and services are readily transferable around the world. And so the fundamental question when you think longer term is how best to deal with globalization. And we at the Bush Center, and I know everybody in this room knows the best way is not to retreat and to become isolationists. The best way is to figure out how to work together for our common good. One of the, I've been fortunate to be the governor of Texas, which, by the way, is a fabulous job, in that the legislature only meets 4 months out of every 2 years. We kind of thought it ought to meet 2 months out of every 4 years. But nevertheless, one of the aspects of being governors, you get to work with your neighbors. Mexican governors, and Garza was the Secretary of State during my presidency, and I worked well with our Mexican governors. And here's what I discovered. I discovered there's a lot of areas of agreement, even though the public likes to figure out ways to disagree. And I figured out that we can work together without sacrificing our cultural heritage. That you can be, proud of your American heritage. You don't have to sacrifice that, and at the same time work with your neighbors. I learned the same thing in working with the Canadians when I was president. I remember the biggest dispute we had was over potatoes. I think it was potatoes. Kind of morphed into softwood lumber quickly thereafter. But we worked together in the spirit of trying to figure out how to improve our peoples, and it's possible to do so. In other words, we don't view working with Mexico and Canada as zero sum. We work at it as a plus for everybody. And that's the spirit of this conference, is how can we best work together and fight off the tendency to isolate ourselves from the realities of the world. So one of the things that Margaret and Rooney did, which was smart, is to develop a competitive scorecard, which we'll talk about today. Basically, it analyzes real data relative to the rest of the world. In other words, how strong are we as a three-nation collaborative relative to China? So one of the really difficult issues in politics when you're running for office is China. It's so easy to, blame problems on somebody else. And China's an easy target. And you hear this kind of seeping into the dialogue, this notion about we can't possibly compete with China. Of course we can compete with China. And we can better compete with China when we work together. That's the whole purpose of this collaborative effort. And so the scorecard will make that point. But scorecards also indicate where we need to do better. So on the one hand, it should say to the American people, have confidence in our future. On the other hand, it ought to say, here's how we all three can improve. And that's part of the effort here, is what can we do to improve our relationship? So it starts first with making the case to the American people or the Canadian people or the Mexican people. And by the way, protectionist sentiments don't only exist in the United States. Make the case why it is in their interest that we work more closely together. Secondly, it is what specific areas can we work on to make the three of us stronger when it comes to the globalized world. And so that's what we're here to discuss. We've got a lot of smart people who are putting their minds together to work on three areas. One is energy. What's happened in the energy field is astonishing. Our national security picture has changed dramatically because of what's taking place in the energy revolution. Our middle class is more likely to be able to realize a better tomorrow as a result of hydrocarbons becoming plenty. Mexico has a chance to really realize the returns from her reserves to help Mexicans have a better future. Canada is a major exporter of energy, primarily to us. Think about how fortunate we are that our big economy, which requires energy to grow, is able to import a lot of energy from a peaceful and friendly friend. Same in Mexico. And so we need to figure out how to work together better on making sure energy is able to move throughout our countries and to make sure our independence from Middle Eastern oil, for example, is secure for the long term. Economically, this energy boom will help all three of nations. I remember when I was president, there was a lot of manufacturing plants that were moving offshore because of natural gas elsewhere was less expensive. Then all of a sudden, smart people came up with the way to extract hydrocarbons from rocks that heretofore were deemed non-productive, and now we've got a lot of natural gas in our hemisphere, which bodes well for manufacturing jobs. But there's more work that we can do together. And so one of the groups here is going to study energy. Another is human capital. Of course, people automatically, think about the immigration issue. And it's certainly an important issue, one I tried to address without success, by the way, as president. But we should not allow the, sometimes hostile words of immigration to affect what we're doing here at the Bush Center. We ought to rise above the noise and work, for example, on how to grow the number of skilled workers with post-secondary certifications and degrees, and to make them more transferable as our economies become more integrated. And that's what we're going to study here. And finally, infrastructure. I mean, there's some classic cases where infrastructure is woefully lacking to make sure that we better coordinate our efforts. I mean, most Americans don't know that when they buy an automobile, a significant number of the parts are manufactured in the United States, a significant amount of the parts are manufactured in Canada, and a significant amount of parts in the same automobile are manufactured in Mexico. And shouldn't it make sense for a consumer to want those transfer of parts to be done as seamlessly as possible so that we can compete globally? And yet when you go down to our border, there are a lot of trucks waiting to come across. And if you go to the Canadian border and the United States border, there is a bridge that enables goods to come between our two countries. And therefore there's an infrastructure bottleneck that makes us less competitive in a globalized world. And so our panelists and our experts are going to figure out how best to affect policy. Here's the purpose. The purpose of your gathering is to help instruct our peoples in all three countries about the benefits of working together in the face of protectionist and isolationist tendencies. And secondly, the purpose is to affect policy in our three nations, is to put forward sound policies to those who've been fortunate enough to be given the opportunity to serve our three countries to affect change. I'm confident that the work we're doing here will have a lasting effect. I'm confident that as we develop policies and work to get those implemented, we'll be able to look back at these initial meetings and say, wow, I did something constructive. I added to the well-being of the people in three great nations. And so it's with a lot of gratitude that I come to thank you for your efforts and your work. Laura and I are dedicating the rest of our lives to projects such as these. I'd like to hang around today, but I've got an art lesson. I'm a painter, much to the shock of a lot of people in our respective countries. So when you go back to Mexico or you go back to Canada, tell them I came by to wish you all the best, and tell them I recognize that my signature is worth a heck of a lot more than the paintings. Thank you for your interest.